They forgot Mother's Day, then demanded cash. I gave them a permanent goodbye instead. My name is Celeste Everson, and I turned 71 this year in a quiet celebration that consisted of nothing more than a cup of tea, a slice of peach cobbler I baked myself, and the gentle hum of the refrigerator in my modest two-story home on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. This house has been my sanctuary since 1985, when my late husband Robert and I scraped together every last dollar from our modest savings to make it ours. The deed remains in my name alone, a yellow document tucked safely in the bottom drawer of my oak dresser, alongside the original bill of sale and years of property tax receipts addressed solely to me. For 35 years I worked diligently at the county recorder's office, where my days were filled with examining deeds, titles, and ownership papers, learning the quiet power that comes from understanding what a single sheet of paper can truly mean when the world tries to take what is rightfully yours. That knowledge, gained through decades of careful work, became the foundation of everything that unfolded in the weeks and months after what should have been a simple Mother's Day passed without acknowledgement. Lena, my only daughter, and her husband Derek had moved into my home 4 years earlier under the guise of a temporary arrangement. Their apartment had grown too small with the arrival of their young child, they explained one rainy afternoon over coffee at my kitchen table. I remember nodding without hesitation, my heart opening wide as it always had for family. I cleared out the guest room, rearranged the closets to make space for their belongings, and assured them they could stay as long as needed. From that day forward, I never asked for rent. I continued to cover the electricity that illuminated their evenings, the water that flowed through the pipes for their showers and laundry, the natural gas that heated the home during cold winters, and the internet and cable services that kept Derek glued to his sports games and Lena scrolling through her phone late into the night. I even added Lena as an authorized user on my bank card, allowing her to purchase groceries, baby supplies, household essentials, and whatever small luxuries caught her eye without the burden of explaining each expense. In return, I expected nothing more than the basic courtesies that bind a family together. Perhaps a shared meal, a quiet conversation, or simply the acknowledgement that this home, built with my hands and my heart, deserved respect. Mother's Day dawned like any other Sunday in May, with birds singing softly outside my bedroom window and the first rays of sunlight filtering through the lace curtains Robert had hung decades ago. I rose early, as was my habit, and began the familiar routine that brought me comfort. I mixed the batter for peach cobbler, using the same recipe passed down from my own mother in Savannah, the one that filled the kitchen with a warm, sweet aroma of cinnamon and ripe fruit baking in the oven. I arranged fresh roses from my garden, pale pink blooms I had tended all spring, in a simple vase on the kitchen table. I wore the soft lavender cardigan Robert had given me many years ago, the one that still carried the faint scent of his aftershave when I pressed it close. I brewed a pot of strong coffee and set the table with the good china plates, the ones reserved for special occasions. I waited patiently, my heart light with the anticipation of a simple Happy Mother's Day, Mama, or perhaps a hug from Lena, or even a card slipped under my door. The clock on the wall ticked steadily forward. 9 o'clock came and went. 10 o'clock arrived with no footsteps descending the stairs. 11 o'clock passed in silence, the cobbler cooling untouched on the counter. By noon, the roses had begun to droop slightly in their vase, and the coffee had grown cold in my cup. No card appeared. No greeting echoed through the house. No acknowledgement of the day that celebrated mothers like me, who had given everything without keeping score. I sat alone at the kitchen table for what felt like hours, staring at the uneaten cobbler and the wilting flowers. The ache in my chest was familiar, a quiet companion that had visited me many times over the years, but this time it settled deeper, like roots taking hold in dry soil. I did not cry. I did not call upstairs to ask if they remembered. I simply rose from the table, covered the cobbler carefully with foil, placed the roses in a smaller jar on the windowsill, and carried on with the day as though the oversight was just another small disappointment in a life filled with them. But something inside me shifted that afternoon, a subtle realignment that I could not yet name. The very next morning, while I was washing breakfast dishes at the sink, my phone buzzed insistently on the kitchen counter. I dried my hands on a dish towel and picked it up. A text from Lena. No greeting. No apology for the day before. No mention of Mother's Day at all. Hey Mom, can you transfer $500? Derek needs it for the car payment. Thanks. The words stared back at me from the screen, simple and cold. The same hands that had held me as a baby, the same heart that had carried her through childhood illnesses, teenage heartbreaks, and the early days of motherhood, now reduced to nothing more than a convenient source of cash. No happy belated Mother's Day. No how are you feeling today. No recognition of the woman who had given her everything. Just a request. Just an expectation. Just another withdrawal from the emotional bank account I had kept open for far too long. I set the phone down carefully. I finished washing the dishes, scrubbing each plate until it shone. I wiped the counter until it gleamed under the morning light. Then I opened my laptop, logged into my bank account, and removed Lena's name from the supplementary card. I called the cable provider and requested the immediate suspension of the sports package Derek watched religiously every weekend. I contacted the internet company and asked for a temporary hold on the service. With each call, my voice remained steady, my requests clear and professional. I did not shout. I did not send angry replies. I simply began to close the doors they had walked through so carelessly, so entitled, for years. By evening the house was enveloped in a quiet I had almost forgotten existed. No blaring commentary from the family room television. No refrigerator door opening every few minutes for another snack or soda. No heavy footsteps overhead as Derek paced during his phone calls. Just me, the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, and the gentle hum of the refrigerator that I had purchased myself 15 years ago. I brewed a pot of tea, chamomile with a touch of honey. I sat in my green velvet armchair, the one constant in my life since Robert's passing, and turned on the small radio I kept on the side table. I tuned it to the old jazz station Robert had loved, the one that played smooth saxophone melodies that filled the room without overwhelming it. The music wrapped around me like a warm embrace. For the first time in years, I felt the space belong entirely to me. The messages began arriving the following day. First from Lena, mid-morning. Mama, the card isn't working at the store. What's going on? Can you fix it? Then from Derek, an hour later. Hey Celeste. Internet's down. I've got important calls today. Turn it back on. I read each one carefully. I did not reply immediately. Instead, I placed the phone face down on the kitchen table and opened my notebook, the small leather-bound one I had started carrying since the night I walked out of the family room. I wrote a single line in careful cursive. Day 2. The silence continues. That silence became my armor. It became my voice when words would have been wasted. It became the boundary I had never drawn before. The days that followed Mother's Day carried a strange stillness I had almost forgotten existed, as though the house itself had been holding its breath for years and was now slowly learning how to exhale. I remained at the Grand Hyatt downtown for the rest of that week, not because I was afraid to return home, but because I needed space to think clearly without the constant pull of their needs pressing against me every moment. The hotel room was modest but comfortable, thick cream-colored curtains that I could draw closed when I wanted privacy, a small desk near the window where I could sit with my notebook and tea, and a bed that allowed me to sleep deeply without the familiar creak of floorboards overhead or the sudden slam of the refrigerator door downstairs. Each morning I woke without an alarm, the soft light filtering through the curtains telling me the day had begun. I made tea in the little electric kettle provided by the hotel, the steam rising gently as I stirred in a spoonful of honey. I opened the curtains and watched the city slowly come to life. Cars moving along Peachtree Street, people walking with purpose, the distant hum of Atlanta waking up around me. For the first time in years, my mornings belonged to me alone. I spent those early days walking the streets near the hotel, something I had not done in a long while. I passed small cafes with outdoor tables, bookstores with windows full of colorful covers, and parks where older couples sat on benches feeding birds. I bought a small notebook from a stationery shop, simple black leather with unlined pages, and a good pen that glided smoothly across the paper. In that notebook, I began writing the things I had never allowed myself to say out loud. I wrote about the years I had spent giving without question, the small hurts I had swallowed, the times I had smiled through disappointment so no one else would feel uncomfortable. I wrote about the Mother's Day that passed in silence, about the cobbler that sat uneaten, about the roses that wilted in their vase while I waited for a word that never came. I wrote about the text message that arrived the very next morning, asking for money as though the day before had never happened. Each page felt like a small release, like pulling a thorn that had been buried deep for too long. On the third day, the messages became more frequent. Lena's texts arrived in clusters, short and increasingly desperate. Mama, the card isn't working at all now. We went to the grocery store and it was declined. What's happening? An hour later. Derek can't work without internet. Please turn it back on. We're really struggling. By evening, Derek's number appeared on my screen for the first time in months, not to ask how I was, not to apologize, but to demand. Celeste, this is not okay. The cable's off. The card's frozen. Fix it right now or we're going to have problems. I read each message carefully, letting the words sit on the screen without the immediate urge to respond that I had once felt so strongly. I did not type angry replies. I did not call to explain or justify. Instead, I placed the phone face down on the nightstand and opened my notebook once more. I wrote another line in careful cursive. Day 3. Their voices are loud, but mine remains silent. Silence is stronger than shouting. The next morning I returned to Andrew Sterling's office. He greeted me with the same steady calm he had always shown, even back when Robert and I used his services for simple real estate matters years ago. We sat in the same conference room where I had signed the notice to quit a few days earlier. Andrew placed the signed acknowledgement of service on the table, the document Roman had delivered, now bearing Derek's reluctant signature scrawled across the bottom. The 30-day clock has officially begun, he said. They have been formally notified under Georgia law. All utilities remain suspended as per your instructions. The supplementary card is frozen. Any attempt to use it will be declined, and you will receive an immediate alert on your phone. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle around me. I had known these steps in theory. I had seen them applied in countless cases at the recorder's office, but applying them to my own life felt both surreal and inevitable. Andrew leaned forward slightly. They will likely try to contact you directly. They may become emotional. They may become angry. They may attempt to guilt you. Whatever they do, do not engage outside of this office. All communication from this point forward goes through me or Roman. You do not owe them explanations. You owe them only the law. I thanked him. Before I left, I asked one final question. If they do not vacate by day 30, what happens next? Andrew met my eyes. Then we file for formal eviction through the Superior Court. A judge will issue an order to vacate. If they still refuse, law enforcement will execute the removal. The process is straightforward, and the law is firmly on your side. I walked out of the office into the warm Atlanta afternoon. I did not rush back to the hotel. Instead, I stopped at a small bookstore near Peachtree Street, the kind of place I had always meant to visit but never found the time. I browsed the shelves slowly, letting my fingers trail over book spines. I selected a slim volume of poetry by Maya Angelou, someone whose words had always spoken to the strength I sometimes forgot I possessed. The clerk smiled as she rang it up. I paid with my own card. No questions, no authorizations needed. I walked back to the hotel with the book in my bag, feeling lighter with every step. That evening, as the city lights began to flicker on outside my window, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Lena. This one was longer. Mama, please. We're out of food. The baby needs diapers. The card isn't working anywhere. Derek is furious. He says you're punishing us. I know we messed up on Mother's Day. I'm sorry. I should have said something. But please don't do this. We need help. I read the message twice. I felt the familiar pull, the old instinct to rush in, to fix, to forgive, to give again. But beneath that instinct was something new, a steady, quiet resolve that had been growing since the moment I locked the gate behind me. I opened my notebook once more. I wrote, Day 4. They remember Mother's Day now, when it costs them something. I remember it too. I remember every year they forgot. I closed the notebook. I placed the phone face down. I opened the book of poetry and read until the words blurred and my eyes grew heavy. The city hummed outside my window, but inside the room there was only peace. The kind of peace that comes when you finally stop carrying what was never yours to carry alone. The morning of the 10th day arrived with a soft grey light filtering through the hotel curtains, the kind of light that feels neither warm nor cold but simply present, waiting for you to decide what it will mean. I woke without an alarm, as had become my habit during these quiet days away from the house. The room was still, the only sound the distant hum of the city outside and the faint ticking of the small clock on the nightstand. I made tea in the electric kettle, the same chamomile blend I had been drinking every morning, and sat at the desk by the window. I opened my notebook, the black leather one that had become my constant companion, and reviewed the lines I had written over the past week. Each entry was brief but deliberate, a record of the shift taking place inside me. Day 5. They remember me when they need something. Day 6. Silence is not weakness, it is clarity. Day 7. The house is waiting for me to return on my own terms. Day 8. They have begun to feel the absence of what they took for granted. Day 9. I am no longer the one who rushes to fill every gap. Today would be different. Today was the day I would face them, not with anger, not with explanations, but with the calm certainty of someone who has finally chosen herself. I dressed carefully in the new clothes I had purchased, the tailored trousers, the crisp white blouse, the beige blazer that fit me like armor I had not known I needed. I slipped on the low-heeled shoes that made a soft, confident click when I walked. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who no longer apologized for taking up space. I gathered my notebook, the folder of documents Andrew had prepared, and left the hotel room. The cab ride to Andrew Sterling's office felt shorter than it ever had before. I did not feel nervous. I felt prepared. Andrew was waiting in the conference room when I arrived. The long table was already set with copies of the notice to quit, the signed acknowledgement of service, the utility suspension confirmations, and the bank statements showing the frozen card. Everything was in order, every piece of paper aligned with precision. Andrew greeted me with a small nod. "They will be here at 10, he said. "Roman will bring them in. You do not have to speak unless you choose to. The documents will do the talking." I took my seat at the head of the table. I placed my notebook in front of me, open to a fresh page. I waited. At precisely 10 o'clock the door opened. Roman entered first, calm and professional as always. Behind him came Derek, his shirt wrinkled, his face tight with barely contained anger. Lena followed, clutching her purse to her chest, her eyes red-rimmed and uncertain. They sat across from me. Derek dropped into the chair heavily, arms crossed. Lena sat more carefully, her gaze flickering between me and the table. Andrew spoke first, his voice even and measured. "Good morning. This meeting is to discuss the notice to quit that was served 10 days ago. The 30-day period is now in effect. Mrs. Everson has terminated the gratuitous occupancy of the property. There is no lease. There is no rental agreement. There is no legal basis for continued residence. You have 20 days remaining to vacate." Derek leaned forward immediately. "This is bullshit," he said. "We've been living there for 4 years. We have rights. You can't just kick us out because you're having a tantrum." I looked at him over the top of my glasses. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "The house belongs to me," I said calmly. "I purchased it. I paid for it. I have maintained it. You and Lena have occupied it without compensation for 4 years. I have revoked the permission I once gave. That is the law." Derek's jaw tightened. He tried another approach. "We're family. You don't evict family. We've been saving. We were going to buy our own place. This is just temporary." I reached into my folder and placed the financial documents on the table, one by one, slowly, deliberately. The statements showing 4 years of avoided living expenses, rent, utilities, groceries, totaling approximately $100,000. The loan default notices. The brokerage account statements showing margin calls. The zero balance. The deficit. "For 4 years, I said. You told me you were saving for a down payment. You told me the money was invested wisely. You told me everything was under control. This is what the records show. Nothing was saved. The money was spent, on loans, on margin trades, on living beyond your means. All while I paid every bill in the house." Derek reached for the papers. Andrew's hand moved first and gently but firmly pushed them back toward Lena. Lena took the statements. Her fingers trembled as she turned the pages. She read the figures. She read the losses. She read the zero balance. Her shoulders slumped further. She whispered, almost to herself, "There's nothing left, it's all gone." Derek stared at the table. For the first time since I had known him, he had nothing immediate to say. I continued in the same calm voice. "The 30-day notice stands. All utilities have been suspended. The supplementary card has been frozen. There will be no further financial support from me. You have 20 days remaining to find new accommodations. If you do not vacate by the deadline, I will file for formal eviction through the court, and law enforcement will assist in the removal." Derek looked up at me. His voice was lower now, almost pleading. "We're family. You can't do this to your own daughter." I turned my gaze to Lena. She was still staring at the papers. Tears were falling onto the pages, blurring the ink slightly. I spoke to her directly. "Lena, I have always believed that family means respect. Respect for each other's space. Respect for each other's boundaries. Respect for each other's property. When Derek told me to go to my room and called me an old woman, you chose silence. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I am your mother, not your landlord. But I am also not your bank. I am not your safety net. I have carried the load for 4 years. Now the load is yours." She looked up at me. Her eyes were wet. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mama. I should have spoken up that night. I should have stood up for you. I should have said, 'This is my mother's house.'" I did not respond immediately. I let the silence sit between us. Then I said, "I know you're sorry. But sorry is not enough. Action is what matters now." I turned to Derek. "You have 20 days. Use them wisely. Find a place. Find a way. This chapter is closed." I gathered my documents. I placed them back in the folder. I stood up. Andrew stood with me. Roman remained seated, ready to handle any follow-up questions. I walked to the door. I paused for a moment. I looked back at Lena. "Tomorrow," I said. "If you want to talk, just you, come to the house at 4 o'clock. Tea will be ready. But come as a guest, not as a tenant." She nodded slowly. I left the conference room. I walked down the hallway. The sunlight from the lobby windows felt warm on my face. I stepped outside. I took a deep breath. I felt lighter than I had in years. The 30th day arrived with the kind of quiet certainty that comes after a long storm has finally passed, leaving the air clear and the ground still damp but ready for new growth. I woke in the hotel room to the soft grey light of early morning filtering through the curtains, the same light that had greeted me every day for the past month. I sat at the small desk by the window for a long while, my notebook open before me, rereading the entries I had written since the day I walked out of the family room and locked the gate behind me. Each page told a small part of the story: the Mother's Day that passed in silence, the cobbler that cooled untouched on the counter, the roses that wilted in their vase while I waited for a word that never came, the text message that arrived the very next morning asking for money as though the day before had been ordinary rather than a quiet wound, the 30 days of suspended utilities and frozen cards, the messages that grew more desperate with each passing week. I closed the notebook and placed it in my bag. Today was not a day for reflection. Today was the day the house returned to me. I dressed carefully, choosing the beige blazer and white blouse that had become my quiet armor over the past month. I slipped on the low-heeled shoes that made a soft, confident click when I walked. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had spent decades giving pieces of herself away, and who had finally decided to keep the rest. I gathered my things, the notebook, the folder of documents, the keys that had waited patiently in my purse, and left the hotel without looking back. The cab ride to the house felt shorter than it ever had before. I did not feel anxious. I felt prepared. When the cab pulled up to the curb, I paid the driver and stepped out. The house stood exactly as I had left it: white siding, green shutters, the small front porch where Robert and I used to sit on summer evenings, but it felt different. It felt like it was waiting for me to come home and make it mine again. I unlocked the gate, walked up the path, and opened the front door. The air inside was still, slightly musty from the days of closed windows, but the house greeted me with a gentle hush. The family room stood empty: no couch, no television, No coffee table cluttered with empty cans and remote controls. Only faint marks on the carpet from where furniture legs had rested for years, and a few small holes in the walls where pictures and shelves had been removed. I closed the door behind me and stood in the silence for a long moment. The house did not feel abandoned. It felt patient. It felt like it had been waiting for me to return and fill it with my own presence. I opened every window. A soft breeze moved through the rooms, carrying away the lingering scent of other people's lives. I put on gloves and began the work I had planned. I wiped down every shelf, scrubbed the baseboards, dusted the corners that had been neglected for so long. I gathered old magazines, stray papers, and forgotten items into garbage bags. I vacuumed the rug until the fibers stood up again. I washed the floors twice with warm water and a lemon-scented cleaner that left the wood gleaming. By late afternoon the house smelled fresh, not of bleach or harsh chemicals, but of renewal. I drove to the hardware store and purchased paint, a soft, warm peach color that reminded me of the sunsets Robert and I used to watch from the porch years ago. The painter arrived the next morning. We finished the family room in one day. When the last coat dried, the walls glowed gently in the afternoon light. The space felt alive again, warm, open, and entirely mine. That evening, just after sunset, there was a soft knock at the door. I knew who it was. Lena. She had not called ahead, but I had left the invitation open. I opened the door. She stood on the porch, hands clasped in front of her, looking uncertain. "Tea is ready," I said simply. She stepped inside. She paused in the hallway and looked around. The peach walls caught the last of the daylight. The furniture was still sparse, but the emptiness felt intentional rather than abandoned. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "It feels like home again." We sat at the kitchen table. I poured tea into 2 mugs. Steam rose between us. She held her mug with both hands, drawing warmth from it. Then she began to speak. "I rented a small studio apartment downtown," she said. "It's nothing fancy. 1 room, a tiny kitchen, a fold-out bed. The neighbor upstairs plays music too loud sometimes, and the ceiling is low, but it's mine. I pay the rent. I signed the lease myself." I listened without interrupting. "I got a full-time job at the marketing firm I used to work for part-time," she continued. "The salary is steady. I opened my own bank account. No supplementary cards. No extra names. Just me." She paused. Her voice softened. "I filed for divorce. The papers are being processed. Derek. He's angry. He blames you. But I told him it wasn't about you. It was about us. About the lies. About the way we lived on your generosity while pretending it was ours." I looked at her. She met my eyes for the first time in a long while. "I'm sorry, Mama," she said. "I should have spoken up that night. I should have stood between you and him. I should have said, 'This is my mother's house.' I didn't. And I'm ashamed of that." I let her words settle between us. Then I spoke. "I know you're sorry," I said. "But sorry is only the beginning. What matters now is what you do next. You have a job. You have a place. You have your own name on the lease and on the bank account. That is the start of something real." She nodded slowly. Tears came, but they were quiet tears. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me," I said. "You just have to keep going. The door is open for you as a guest. Tea will always be ready, but it will never again be open for tenants. That chapter is closed." She stayed for nearly an hour. We talked about small things, the new apartment, the job, the future. When she stood to leave, she hugged me, a brief, adult embrace, not the clinging hug of someone who still needed to be carried. She walked to the door. She turned back once. "I'll call before I come next time," she said. "Like a guest should." I nodded. "That's exactly right." She left. I watched her walk down the path, head held high, step steady. The door closed softly behind her. The weeks after Lena's first visit as a guest unfolded slowly and almost gently, like the turning of seasons that you do not notice until one day you look up and realize the leaves have changed color without your permission. I returned to the house full-time after the 30th day, carrying only the small bag I had taken to the hotel and the notebook that had become my silent witness throughout this entire journey. The moment I stepped across the threshold, I felt the shift, not dramatic, not loud, but steady and real, as though the house itself had been holding its breath for years and was now slowly learning how to exhale in my presence once again. The air inside was still faintly scented with lemon cleaner and fresh peach paint, the walls glowing softly in the afternoon light that poured through the open windows I had left ajar when I last visited. The family room, once crowded with Derek's oversized couch, Lena's scattered shopping bags, the baby's colorful toys, and the ever-present blare of the television, now stood open and empty. The carpet bore faint marks where furniture legs had rested for years, and a few small holes dotted the walls where pictures and shelves had been removed, but those imperfections felt like honest scars rather than wounds that needed to be hidden. I did not rush to fill the space with new furniture or decorations. I let it breathe. I let it remember who it belonged to. I let it become mine again in the quietest, most deliberate way possible. Every morning I woke to the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the same clock Robert had wound every Sunday evening for as long as we lived here. I made tea in the kitchen, the chamomile blend with a touch of honey that had become my ritual, and sat at the table where I had once waited alone on Mother's Day. I opened my notebook and wrote whatever came to mind. Memories of Robert and the way he used to hum old jazz tunes while making breakfast on lazy Sundays, recollections of Lena as a little girl running through the garden with sticky fingers and laughter that filled every corner of the house, thoughts about the years I had spent believing that love meant giving until nothing remained for myself. I wrote about the Mother's Day that had passed in silence, about the cobbler that sat uneaten on the counter while I stared at the clock, about the roses that wilted in their vase while I waited for a word that never came. I wrote about the text message that arrived the very next morning, asking for money as though the day before had been ordinary rather than a quiet wound that cut deeper than any shout ever could. I wrote about the 30 days of suspended utilities and frozen cards, the messages that grew more desperate with each passing week, the meeting in Andrew's office where the truth finally lay exposed on the table between us like a document that could no longer be ignored. I wrote about the moment I locked the gate behind me and walked away, about the hotel room that became my sanctuary, about the quiet strength that grew in the silence I had finally allowed myself to keep. Each entry felt like a small act of reclamation, a way of speaking the truth to myself when no one else had been willing to hear it for so many years. Now every Wednesday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the house fills with the soft sound of women arriving at my door. Betty comes first, always with a small tin of homemade cookies she insists on sharing, her hands still dusted with flour from the baking she did that morning. Zoe follows, carrying her notebook and a quiet determination in her eyes, the kind that comes from someone who has spent too many years saying yes when she meant no. Olga arrives last, sometimes with a new question she has been turning over in her mind all week, her voice low but steady as she speaks. They sit around the kitchen table, the same table where I once waited alone on Mother's Day, and we drink tea from mugs I have had since Robert and I first moved in. I pour the tea slowly, letting the steam rise between us like a gentle bridge, and we talk about the things no one else seems willing to discuss openly in polite company. How to write a proper will that actually protects what you have earned over a lifetime, how to maintain separate bank accounts even in marriage or partnership, how to protect passwords and personal documents from those who might misuse them without a second thought, and most importantly, how to say no when someone tries to take more than they have a right to take. I show them the papers I used, the original deed with its yellowed edges and unbreakable language, the notice to quit that Roman served with calm precision, the bank statement showing the frozen card, the utility suspension confirmations, the loan default notices that finally laid bare the truth of Derek's so-called savings. I explain the steps in simple terms, the way I once explained title transfers to nervous clients at the recorder's office. I tell them my story when they ask, not the polished version meant for polite conversation, but the real one, the Mother's Day that passed in silence, the cobbler that cooled untouched on the counter, the roses that wilted while I waited for a word that never came, the text message that arrived the very next morning asking for money as though the day before had been ordinary rather than a quiet wound. I tell them about the 30 days of suspended utilities and frozen cards, the messages that grew more desperate with each passing week, the meeting in Andrew's office where the truth finally lay exposed on the table between us like a document that could no longer be ignored. I tell them about the moment I locked the gate behind me and walked away, about the hotel room that became my sanctuary, about the quiet strength that grew in the silence I had finally allowed myself to keep. I tell them about Lena's visit after the house was empty, about the tea we shared at this very table, about the way she finally looked at me as a person rather than a resource to be drawn from endlessly. I tell them that love does not mean giving until nothing remains for yourself. Love means knowing when to say no, and meaning it with every fiber of your being. Some days we laugh, quiet, knowing laughter at the absurdity of how long we let things go on before we finally spoke up. Some days there are tears, when someone shares a story that mirrors mine too closely, when the pain of being taken for granted becomes too real in the telling. But every week the room fills with women who are learning the same lesson I learned. You do not have to give everything away to be loved. You do not have to shrink yourself to make room for others. You can say no, and still be a good mother, a good friend, a good person. Now I sit in my green armchair every evening. The peach walls glow softly in the lamplight. I take the remote control in my hand. I turn on music, usually violin pieces that fill the room with calm. I set the volume exactly where I like it. No one turns it off. No one tells me to go to my room. No one claims the space as their own. Because this is my house. This is my chair. This is my life. And I am finally home. Truly home. The house is quiet now, but it is not empty. It is filled with my presence, my choices, my boundaries. It is filled with the small, deliberate acts of a woman who has learned that the most powerful word she can say is no, and that saying it does not make her cruel. It makes her whole. Thank you for listening to my entire story. If it touched you, if it reminded you of something in your own life, or if it gave you the courage to draw your own line, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. What city are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? I read every single message. With love and quiet strength. Celeste Everson. Atlanta, Georgia. January 3rd, 2026.